Okay, hi everybody. I am very glad that you're here tonight. The last time we were together, I shared a little bit in advance of something that I actually did with Trip Fuller and Brian McLaren. I shared a piece of a lecture where I was talking about trends and sort of new shapes of spirituality and theology in the last 20 years, what's been going on around us. And one of the things that I mentioned that a lot of you responded to pretty strongly, for those of you who were here at the last Zoom, and those of you who are new, this is going to be real easy to catch up with. As I talked about how there was an unexpected revolution going on in the field of biblical studies, and that it was going to be really interesting over the next decade or two to see where this would take us. And the revolution, of course, is the digital revolution, and that all kinds of ancient texts are coming online. And what's possible to do right now is people who are at all different levels of interest in the Bible, all different levels of religious studies, being in seminary, being in graduate school, can have access to texts that were once reserved to only scholars with lots of money and lots of resources who could fly around the world. And so as I was explaining why this was so important, I talked about a friend of mine, Elizabeth Schrader, who is a graduate student in New Testament at Duke, who in the last few years has a great story, and I'm going to let her tell her own story, but she has a great story about moving from being a singer-songwriter to being a New Testament scholar. And in the process of her own spiritual journey unfolding, she's been doing research on Mary Magdalene that is absolutely revolutionary. And several of you asked lots of questions about that. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to ask Libbie to come on. And so there she is on your screen, Elizabeth Schrader, known as Libbie Schrader.
Hi.
And I'm just really excited to have Libbie here. We first met online, and we talked some on Twitter, and eventually she said to me, hey, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. Would you like to get together? We got together for coffee. And Libbie, how long did that time
I feel
last?
like it was 2 hours. It was about 2 hours.
That would be, I think, about the shortest it would be. It might have been 3. But by the end of it, you had blown my socks off. And so I really wanted to introduce you to people here at the cottage, and have you share a little bit of your story and your research, and to start letting them in on what this digital revolution in textual studies in the New Testament is all about.
I
So
would be happy to.
yeah,
Shall I start with how it all began?
sure. I love the way it begins. I think that's a really important part of the story.
It is interesting and strange. So for a very long time, over a decade, I was a professional singer-songwriter, Libbie Schrader, and I had some successes. I toured with Jewel. I won a big contest from Pantene, and I was on an episode of the Gilmore Girls. I had a lot of fun things happen, and but I was getting a little bit frustrated with the music business. I had just showcased for the president of Epic Records, and it hadn't gone as well as I'd wanted, and I was feeling very frustrated. And I was I actually met with my lawyer and with Jules' mother, which is that's a whole other side story I haven't even told Diana about. But we had a really intense meeting where we were like looking down on Central Park and like lighting a candle and thinking about what to do next. And I remember Jules' mother, Lenedra, said, "You just need to jump off the cliff." And I was like, "What is she talking about?" But I was sort of praying about it. And at the time, I was living with my sister in Prospect Heights, and that's in Brooklyn. And I lived right around the corner from this beautiful Catholic church, which is now the Co-Cathedral in Brooklyn, called the Church of St. Joseph. And they had a beautiful garden dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And this was maybe a 5-minute walk from my sister's house. So I would go there often to pray and meditate. And an older lady had just taught me how to pray the rosary, and I was sort of getting into Marian devotion, which is something that I am still very interested in. And I was praying basically to the Virgin Mary. I was raised Episcopalian, and my dad said that's something that Catholics do. But I just was starting to feel more of a connection to Mother Mary. And I was praying in this garden, and strangely, I heard words, which really doesn't happen to me very often. Like maybe 3 times in my life, I have heard words in response to a prayer. And the reason I know it wasn't from me is because it's something that I never would have thought of. So I was praying, and the response I got was, maybe you should talk to Mary Magdalene about that. And I was like, hmm? That's not what I came here for. I thought it was just so strange. And so I decided, well, that's funny. I was in the Garden of the Holy Virgin, and I asked for the blessing of the Magdalene. And I was walking home. I'm like, oh, that's cute. That's a good little rhyme. So I went back to my sister's house. I was living with my sister, and I had a keyboard there, and I just started writing this song. It took only 2 or 3 days to write this song. It came very fast. And then after I wrote the song, I said, well, I can't write a song about Mary Magdalene and not know anything about her. I was a professional musician. I had grown up going to church in the Episcopal Church. I was also really interested in meditation. I had been doing a lot of meditation at this time. And so I walked over to the Brooklyn Public Library, and I got the Complete Idiot's Guide to Mary Magdalene, found out everything I could. And I actually went to France to look at the south of France. This is like a whole other, and maybe Diane and I are going to do a pilgrimage someday to these beautiful places in the south of France. I've now been 4 times, and I've seen some amazing things in the south of France that I would love to show people if they want to come see them. I made friends with this French researcher. That's a whole other story. But somewhere along the line, I thought to myself, I wonder if the Gospel of John, that's the one where Mary and Jesus are in the garden together, Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And I wonder if anything might have been changed in that story. In my Complete Idiot's Guide to Mary Magdalene, I had found out about the Nag Hammadi Corpus, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, where you see conflict between Peter and Mary, and just people sort of complaining about Mary Magdalene. And I said, well, if Mary Magdalene was so controversial and the Gospel of John is the one where she's the most prominent, I wonder if anything was changed. And so I said, I want to look at the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John. What is that? Like, what's the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John? So I Google, and it's like, okay, Papyrus 66. There's one little fragment, Papyrus 52, but it's just a couple of verses. The oldest book of the Gospel of John is Papyrus 66, copied around 200 AD. And I was like, okay, I want to look at that. How do I look at that? And I don't know what, I thought it had been translated. I don't know what I thought. I was just a layperson. And through my parish priest in Oregon, I was connected to a scholar in Manhattan named Deirdre Good, who was kind of a specialist on the Marys. And she was teaching New Testament at General Theological Seminary in Chelsea and Manhattan. And so I was able to connect with Deirdre. And I remember sitting with her at this coffee shop and saying, I want to look at Papyrus 66. How do I do that? And I had gone into the library at General Seminary and hoped that there was like a book or something. And I couldn't find, I'm like, there's no book here. How do I look at Papyrus 66? How do I do that? I really want to know. And so actually, because we were on a screen share, I can show you. Deirdre sent me a link, and she said, oh, there's this new website called Johannes.com. And I am going to show you what it looks like. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. And so it didn't look quite like this at the time, but it looked very similar. And so Papyrus 66, this is what I looked at. And I'm like, it's all in Greek. I don't read Greek. So what I did, but I was very determined. And so I got out an interlinear study Bible, which, so I would have one window open to, this online window that says what each Greek word means in each verse. And then I would have another window open to this, which is the transcription of Papyrus 66. These little red parts are the parts that are sort of like theorized, they're conjectured because the text is missing there. And then these blue ones are the most interesting. Ooh, you can see that the scribe wrote something and then it corrects with the first correction hand. So of course, first I went to the Mary Magdalene spots, in chapter 20, and I was expecting, here's the Mary Magdalene stuff. Oh wait, no, sorry, that's chapter 19. Though I did look at chapter 19 as well. And so I'm like, oh, Maria was changed to Mariam. Okay, nothing too exciting. And so I'm looking, I'm like, well, there's not much exciting here. But I had read somewhere, probably in my Complete Idiot's Guide, that some people think that Lazarus's sister Mary is Mary Magdalene. Diana, I've never shown you this. This is so fun. I can show you this with the screen share. So I'm like, well, let me just look. Some people think that Lazarus's sister Mary, who anoints Jesus, by the way, you can see there's a lot of corrections in this manuscript. Kind of, good to know because this is the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John. So let's see. There we go. So I get to chapter 11. Can you see this? I get to chapter 11. Where are we? Is this it? Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. That's a lot of changes.
There's all the changes, right?
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, so this is the name Maria, and it's changed to say Martha. Again, I didn't really read Greek, but I was just I was also using Google Translate, which I really should not have done because it translates into modern Greek. Not recommended. But I was just a layperson. And then I said, okay, it said his sister, and it changes to her sister. I see that it said, therefore, it looks like it said Mary sent to him saying, I'm like, wait, what? Mary sent to him? Your Bible in John 11, verse 3 will say the sisters sent to him. And I'm like, wait, this is the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John. Are you telling me that the name Mary has been crossed out 2 times? The first time it's changed to say Martha. The second time it's changed to say the sisters. So I didn't really understand completely what was happening here, but I copied this and I sent it to Deirdre. And I said, Deirdre, look at this. The subject line had maybe 12 exclamation points. And I said, Deirdre, look at this. They're changing the text. And she said, very interesting. And I was like, what? This is the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John. Why aren't you really excited? And the reason is because Papyrus 66 had been published in 1958. It was discovered in 1952 near Dishna, Egypt. It's now held at the Bodmer Library near Coligny, Switzerland. And so it was published in 1958. And I think Deirdre, this is one of the world's most important gospel manuscripts. And I think Deirdre thought that the work had been done. So, she's like, well, that's very interesting. So I just meanwhile freaked out, and I was walking over to the Brooklyn Public Library and getting every single thing I could get on interlibrary loan, every scholarly article to do with Papyrus 66. And I was like, what have the scholars said? Turns out they all said the name Mary has been changed to Martha. The name Mary has been changed to say the sisters. This is the strangest change in the whole papyrus. And that's the end of the scholarship in the 1960s. And I was like, what? Wait a second. Some people think that this Mary is is Mary Magdalene, and her name is crossed out, and Martha's getting added. Wait a second. Are you saying that nobody has done anything? The answer is nobody had done anything. They just sort of saw the strange change and they shrugged. And I was like, okay, apparently I need to get a master's degree. And that is what ended up happening. I enrolled in General Theological Seminary. Deirdre became my thesis supervisor. At first I thought I was going to write about Papyrus 66, but then the website I just showed you, Johannes.com, it has hundreds of transcriptions of the Gospel of John. Okay. And so somebody said, well, maybe you should look at other manuscripts. Guess what? Dozens of manuscripts have problems around Martha. You can see Mary getting changed to Martha. You can see one sister where there's supposed to be 2. You can see singular verbs. You can see Mary doing things like serving the supper, which Martha's supposed to do in your Bible. And I was like, did I find a corruption in the Gospel of John that nobody noticed? It was very strange. And so I finished my master's thesis, and I found out that you can actually reconstruct a substantial portion of John 11, not just using Papyrus 66, but using two other really important manuscripts, Codex Alexandrinus and Codex Colbertinus. And if you cobble together crossed out readings and you put them all in a row, some from Codex Alexandrinus, some from Papyrus 66, and some from Codex Colbertinus, you can get a different version of the story. And it's 5 verses, John 11, 1 through 5, with just Lazarus and Mary. And, maybe I will show that to you also. Should I share that with them, Diana?
Yeah, because I think that visualization of that will really help. I mean, I think it's sort of stunning that we grow up with this story and it's about Lazarus having 2 sisters. And what you have uncovered is that it isn't that at all. It's Lazarus.
It may well not be.
Right. It's probably your research points in the direction of 1 sister.
It does. And so there you can see this is a different version of the text. And if you open to John 11 in your Bible, you can compare. And the thing is that this is not a conjectured text. This isn't me saying, I bet this is what the evangelist wrote. This is called an eclectic text. An eclectic text, and by the way, all Greek critical editions of the New Testament are eclectic texts. You're basically taking different readings from different manuscripts and putting them together and creating a new coherent text. And it's perfectly coherent. It says, there was a certain sick man, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary, his sister. Now this was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore Mary sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, the one you love is sick. But when Jesus heard, he said to her, the sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Lazarus and his sister. No Martha anywhere. And these are real manuscripts that have been crossed out and changed. And I'm going to show you, I'm not going to go through the whole PowerPoint, but I do want to show you that some of the earliest artwork of the Lazarus story has just 1 sister.
Oh, wow. I love that one.
Yeah, that one's beautiful.
Yeah.
I always like saying this is not Martha. This guy over here.
That's probably one of the male disciples there.
Yeah. Maybe Thomas or something, but if they're going to put a figure besides Mary, why isn't it Martha? Maybe because Martha's not there. Mm-hmm. So, this research has kept going. It's basically writing that song has taken me down the world's deepest rabbit hole. And so now I'm like, well, okay, well, maybe the Gospel of John was changed to, and what I think it comes down to is the Christological confession in John's Gospel, John 11, verse 27. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. As I was writing my master's thesis at General Seminary, I found out that Tertullian said Mary gave the Christological confession. He was writing around 208 AD. So maybe Tertullian's copy, Mary's the Christological confessor. And
the Bibles that we have, it's Martha who says that.
Oh, yes, exactly. Right now, when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, those who believe in me will never die, he's talking to Martha. But Tertullian thought he was talking to Mary. And if Martha's not there in this story, the parallels between Lazarus' sister Mary, who's crying at a tomb, are so similar to Mary Magdalene, who's crying at a tomb in the encounter between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, that a reader of John's Gospel, maybe on the 2nd or the 3rd read, would notice how similar these 2 crying Marys at tombs are. And also Jesus says when Mary anoints Jesus in chapter 12, he says, let her save the perfume for the day of my burial. There's only one Mary who goes to his tomb in John, and that's Mary Magdalene. So there's all these subtle suggestions that Lazarus' sister Mary is Mary Magdalene. And if she were saying the Christological confession, then that would make her a central character throughout the entire gospel. She's the confessor of the thesis statement of the Gospel of John. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. That's thought to be the thesis statement of the Gospel of John. And then she anoints Jesus. And if you understand her to be Mary Magdalene, which we know people did, we have a lot of people assuming that Lazarus' sister Mary is Mary Magdalene in the 3rd, 4th centuries. Then she's at the cross, and she's the first person to go to the empty tomb. Jesus appears only to her, And then he gives her an apostolic commission. And that's, wow, we've got a central character in the Gospel of John, similar to Peter's character in the Gospel of Matthew. And so I'm suggesting that, so my thesis and my master's thesis ended up getting published in the Harvard Theological Review. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm a good text critic. Maybe I should not be a musician, I mean, professionally anymore. Maybe I should, apparently my brain can do textual criticism. So I switched, and now I'm in a PhD program at Duke. But the master's thesis was published in the Harvard Theological Review. And so now it's a reasonable argument that perhaps Martha was added to the text of John to make sure that Mary Magdalene is diluted. So Lazarus' sister Mary is no longer Mary Magdalene. Now it's Martha's sister. So I'm suggesting that Martha and Mary from Luke's gospel are a different family than Lazarus and Mary from John's gospel. They're in two different locations, in fact, if you read your Bible. And also Martha and Mary don't even have a brother in Luke 10. It's just Martha and Mary that Jesus visits. So it's possible these are two different families, and early editors who didn't like how prominent Mary was in John 11, they're like, let's take that character Martha from Luke and stick her in here. So now Lazarus' sister Mary is a different Mary, and Martha gets the Christological confession. A minor character is the central confessor of the gospel now. So I'm saying this might be some editing that happened to our gospel text to ensure that Mary Magdalene did not have a central role in this gospel.
So, I mean, when you told me that for the very first time, I think that it shook me so deeply I didn't even know what to think, because it's obvious if that is what happened, it's someone's sort of social, political, theological motive for taking Mary Magdalene and basically sort of chopping her in half and creating two characters out of one.
Or three. Or maybe Martha and Mary from Luke and Mary Magdalene.
Oh, yeah, right. So you have the family at the tomb, the two sisters, and then you have Mary Magdalene. But I can also kind of remember I had just preached a sermon on the end of John when we were talking for the very first time. And I realized that was something I had never even noticed before, is that you have the scene of the crying Mary and Martha at the tomb in John 11. And then of course you have that same scene repeated in John. And it just makes so much more sense in terms of literature, in terms of making a longer theological point, that it's Mary and Mary, and that John 11 is prefiguring John 20. And so what do we do with that?
It does, and it makes better sense of the evidence. Everybody always wonders, why don't Martha and Mary have a brother? Why are they in Galilee or Samaria? I thought they were supposed to live in Bethany. And this just makes so much more sense if and why did people think that Lazarus' sister Mary was Mary Magdalene going back to the 3rd century? I'm like, well, maybe because the earliest text of John encouraged readers to think so. And it also makes more sense of the anointings, but let's not get into that because that's kind of a mess. But it actually, if you take Martha out of the Gospel of John, then all of these sort of exegetical puzzles start to make much better sense.
Well, and that raises the interesting question, and also something that's happened as a follow through to this. Part of the reason why I wanted to introduce you to this group is, a lot of graduate students do research and they present all sorts of controversial ideas. But this particular idea is really starting to shake up serious New Testament scholarship literally all around the world. So what happened to you in the summer before the pandemic regarding this Harvard Theological Review article?
Well, of course, as a PhD student at Duke, we have to learn German. That's one of the things that biblical studies students have to know because so much New Testament scholarship has been written in German. And so there's a program in Mainz, Germany, where you can go and you are immersed. And so I was in Germany studying German that summer. And it turns out, so your Nestle Aland Greek New Testament, which probably a lot of the people on this Zoom have. Um, I had actually mailed an off print of my Harvard Theological Review article to the editors at Nestle Aland. It was actually, I found out later, my peer reviewer revealed himself to me. It was Eldon Epp, who is one of the 20th century's most towering text critics for people who follow that kind of thing. And I was actually shocked when I found out that he was my peer reviewer at Harvard Theological Review. And he said, I'm your peer reviewer. You should send your off print to these guys, and here's their address. So I mailed it to them, and at SBL, I gave a paper, actually my Rabboni paper, which is getting published in TC, a Journal of Textual Criticism. It's another problem around Mary Magdalene and John 20, but that's a different conversation. I presented that at SBL, and this very sweet German man comes up to me. He's like, hello, I am Holger Strutwolf. And I was like, what? Holger Strutwolf is the head editor of this. I was like, I know who you are. He's like, I read your article. I was very impressed. I liked it a lot. Thank you for sending it to me. I was like, okay, it's nice to meet you. I was sort of terrified. And so when I was going to be in Mainz for this German program, I said, hi, I'm going to be there. Would you like to meet? And he says, yes, come, we will come and talk to you. So I met with Holger Strutwolf, who's the nicest man, but he's also, so he's like, oh, my friends joke that I write the Bible. And I'm like,
this is the guy. This is the editor of the Greek New Testament, and the person who controls the translation of all of it for every biblical scholar and every Christian everywhere in the world. I mean, this is like meeting the guy who is the Bible.
Well, like, I mean, it's a committee, but he's the head member. He's right. He's sort of like Kurt Aland was the head member when when Bruce Metzger was on the committee. So there's a committee of 5, but he's the head of the committee. And so he very generously, and some other people who are on the committee were also in the meeting with me, including Georg Gabel and Greg Paulson, and somebody who worked there, Dora Pinella, and who's Greek, and so her Greek is excellent. And we all met for over an hour, and I showed them my data tables because I've looked at over 250 transcriptions now of the Gospel of John. And basically, we just went over, I showed them all of the textual problems. I showed them photographs. I showed them the artwork that I just showed you. And they were asking me a lot of questions. And they said, we want you to know we take this really seriously. We understand your argument. And I said, you could print those 5 verses of reconstructed text in your next edition if you want. And they're like, oh, I don't know. But I that's a big deal to like put an alternative text. I'm like, well, you could if you wanted to. My hope is that at least the apparatus, for those of you who follow this, you can, this is the Greek. So this is the text that they put in as like what they believe to be what the evangelist wrote. And then in the footnotes are the manuscript variants. And I think I can certainly get some updates in the manuscript variants in the next edition. I think that in itself is an accomplishment that a lot of people spend their whole lives trying to make change to the footnotes of Nestle Aland. If we were going to try to change the actual text, we would probably have to find a manuscript where Martha is completely absent. Right now, every single manuscript we know of, Martha is there. She's kind of, bumping in and out. Sometimes she's there, sometimes she's not. Sometimes, a name is crossed out, but Martha is in every manuscript that we have. So it's a theory right now. But I remember Holger Strutwolf saying to me, this is real. You have found something real. The question is what is the source of it? And they say your theory is reasonable, but it's not enough for them to say we know that the text was changed. They acknowledge that it's a valid theory.
So a couple of quick questions. Someone wanted you to say the name of the head of the translation committee of the Nestle Aland once again, so that they can get it to write it down.
Holger Strutwolf. If you have a Nestle Aland, his name is right there at the front. He's very German and very sweet. Holger Strutwolf.
Okay. And then you talk a lot. I mean, your evidence is substantial, as obviously these experts have acknowledged. Someone wants to know what are the implications of this editing out of Mary Magdalene, John? What do you speculate as the implications of this?
Um, well, because it's possible that the evangelist intends to suggest. Now, the word Magdalene is not there in John 11, but the parallels are there between John 11 and John 20, and also Mary who anoints Jesus, Jesus saying that she's going to go to his tomb. The parallels are there between Lazarus' sister Mary and Mary Magdalene. If, as Tertullian thought, Mary gave the central Christological confession in the Gospel of John, that makes her very similar to Peter in the Gospel of Matthew. At Caesarea Philippi, Peter confesses Jesus as the Messiah. And of course, that's when Jesus says, you are Simon Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of heaven, the gates of Hades will not prevail against you. I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. That rings a bell, right? So it's this huge reward for Peter for being the first person to recognize and confess Jesus as the Christ in Matthew's gospel. So I'm suggesting that Mary could have had that sort of a central role in the Gospel of John, but that copyists, understanding that Mary could be seen as a rival to Peter, we know that from texts like the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas, that Peter, whoever Peter's followers were, Peter had a problem with Mary. He, in the Gospel of Thomas, he says, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Yeah.
And which is the Gnostic gospel that says that she'll go to heaven, but or that women will go to heaven, but they'll be made a man or something to that effect?
Right after, it's the same saying. Jesus says to Peter, "I will make Mary male."
Right.
So that she can become spiritual like the rest of you. So the Gospel of Thomas is it's a strange document, but it definitely suggests that Peter does not like Mary, and you get that also in the Gospel of Mary, where he says, did he love her more than us? And he seems to be very jealous of Mary. In the Pistis Sophia, which is in like kind of a later text, Peter says, "We cannot suffer this woman. She will not stop talking." So there's several documents where Peter seems to have a problem with Mary Magdalene. And so I'm saying if Peter's legacy, those who follow him, are the people who happen to be sanctioned by Constantine to take over, what Christianity is, they might say, okay, well, we like this gospel. We like this Gospel of John. We just don't like that part. So we just need to edit it a little bit to ensure that women cannot have equal authority to men in this church that's being built. And so I'm suggesting that as our gospels came forward, it's possible that Peter's central role in Matthew is matched by Mary Magdalene in John's gospel, that they have, so that's sort of how the gospels came forward as intended. But those who had control over the copying of the text might have edited it to ensure that Mary's role is diluted and diminished. It's still a woman that gives the Christological confession, but she's a minor character, and she goes away right after that scene. So it fractures her, and it diminishes her power and her authority, and it worked.
Yeah, when I think about John 11 and 12, I didn't even kind of remember that Martha said that. I mean, it comes up in the gospel, but it's like, oh, Martha, no big deal. And you just kind of move on with the I am stories and the other, you're getting ready at that point to move into the great 4 chapters of the long farewell discourse. And so it kind of gets passed over, I think, because, it's just not, it has very little literary strength at that point, because it's a character you just don't remember.
That's true. I agree with you completely. Most people remember the quote, but they don't know who says it. It's absolutely right. True. And so another thing that I think is really important here, a lot of people get very disturbed by this suggestion, and they say, gosh, if people are only noticing this now, what other things are we missing? And what other things might have been changed? And it can be very troubling for people's faith. But what I actually found very anchoring as I did this research, I kept coming back to John 11, verse 4, which is in the reconstructed text that I showed you, but it's just at the beginning of that chapter. Jesus says, "This illness is not unto death, but it is for the glory of God, in order to glorify the Son through it. And I kept coming back to that. I was doing this research while living in a seminary. General Seminary is a residential seminary in Manhattan. I was going to chapel every day. I was meditating. I was praying the rosary. And I was researching and praying every day. And that was the verse that kept lighting up for me. And it was almost as though the illness that Jesus refers to. Of course, he's talking about Lazarus's illness in the story, but it's also a way of looking at it that there's an illness in the text. The text is ill. And it's almost as though the text knows what's going to happen to it. So fascinating. This illness is not unto death, but it is for the glory of God, in order to glorify the Son through it. To me, that helped. In fact, it cemented my faith as a Christian. It kind of blew my mind. I was like, this is not a normal book. The Gospel of John is crazy. I was like, it really felt to me as though the text sensed that it's almost like the word is vulnerable. Just as Jesus's body was vulnerable, the word is vulnerable, and yet Jesus knows. It's not as though Jesus doesn't know. In that quote, it felt to me as though Jesus was saying that there's a wound in the word. The word is wounded. And that wound perhaps was necessary for the gospel to be accepted to the canon. Because if Mary Magdalene had that big of a role, maybe they couldn't have received the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John says the Spirit of truth cannot be received. So you have to tell a lie for it to be received. That's how it makes sense to me. But also it strengthens my faith, because Jesus is saying the illness is not unto death, but it's for the glory of God. And if I'm reading it correctly, maybe I'm just a graduate student with an interesting thesis, but if I'm reading it correctly, then that means that there's something exciting about to happen. There's something that's going to happen for the glory of God. And I'm so excited to be able to tell people about
it. When you said that, I got chills. And the idea of the vulnerability of the word, because of course that's the place the gospel opens up. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, the word was God. And someone else, Gordon, put up, and the word was made flesh, and then repeated your quote right there, the word was wounded. And if that doesn't, I mean, all of a sudden I'm thinking about a million Good Friday sermons that I haven't yet preached. And so, and I'm sure that other people here are thinking about that as well. I want you to say one last thing, and then I do want to open up for some questions from our friends here. The other thing about the competitiveness between Mary Magdalene and Peter, you have an article coming out in the Journal of Biblical Literature pretty soon that addresses that particular piece. And so, want to tell us what the word Magdalene means?
Absolutely. I'd be glad to. By the way, I found out yesterday it's coming out in the next issue. They bumped us up. So it's going to be in the December issue of JBL for those of you who follow those kinds of scholarly journals. It's a co-write with Joan Taylor at King's College London, who is a real specialist in Second Temple Judaism. And she also knows a lot about Mary Magdalene. And so we're looking at this tendency in recent scholarship to say Mary of Magdala. And we were just investigating that because we know that some of the earliest commentators, like Hippolytus of Rome, Ambrose of Milan, the Manichaeans, 3rd century, 4th century people, think that Mary of Bethany is Mary Magdalene. So if Mary's from Bethany, she can't be from Magdala. So why are we translating it as Mary of Magdala? So we just decided to do a study of all of the evidence of people talking about what her name meant. And it turns out that the record is completely divided. Some people thought that she was from a town called Magdalene, not Magdala, and that this is Eusebius. So Eusebius is a church historian. He's Constantine's historian. He says that she's from Magdalene, and then he talks about a different place called Magdala, which is in Judea. And he says he doesn't say that she's from this place. And also Magdala, as we know it today, is supposed to be in Galilee. So clearly Eusebius doesn't. And by the way, he's living in Caesarea, which is walking distance from Magdala. Like you can actually walk to Magdala from where we think Magdala is today. If any of you have gone to that beautiful synagogue near the Sea of Galilee on your Holy Land journeys, they say, oh, well, this is where Mary Magdalene is from. Maybe not. This is something, and so Joan and I did a lot of digging, and it turns out that it starts in the 5th and 6th centuries with pilgrim reports. It's when people want to have a place to venerate her, and it's in the East, because in the East, people thought that it's a bit complicated, but it turns out that in the East, some people were saying that she was from Magdala, but that doesn't pop up until the 6th century. Whereas in the West, they think that she's Lazarus and Martha's sister. So there's this divided record. And I'm saying, well, maybe there's a reason people are confused. Maybe it's because the text was changed, could be. But so fortunately, Joan is an Aramaicist. And we were looking at what Origen of Alexandria had to say. And he talks about how the word probably means magnification. And Jerome, Saint Jerome, he says that that the word Magdalene means that she is a toweress. She's of the tower. So some of our earliest commentators seem to be saying that Mary is the magnified one, or that she is a toweress. Mary the tower. That's really interesting because Peter is considered to be the rock. So if Peter in Matthew is the rock, maybe Mary Magdalene in John is the tower. The word Migdal just means tower. So is she from the town that has a tower, or is she herself a tower? And when you translate it as Mary of Magdala, you erase the possibility that Mary was given a title with as much weight as Simon was given, Simon Peter the rock, or James and John sons of thunder. So please don't say Mary of Magdala, say Mary Magdalene, because that made me Mary the tower. From Bethany.
That's an amazing place to open up for about 10 minutes of questions. The people are going crazy in the chat. And so anyone who has a question, if you want to just go ahead and raise your hand, you can do it physically, but it's easier if you go down to the reaction button and you push on that little reaction button with the smiley face, and underneath that there's a hand raise button that you can just press that. Aha, Lindsay. Richard, can you unmute Lindsay and have Lindsay just ask her question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Lindsay.
Okay, super. Hey, I have loved this. This has been so fascinating and so awesome. Thank you. So I'm wondering, author Kate Bushnell wrote the Bible for women. And I'm wondering, Libbie, will you write a revised version of John with the major presence of Mary Magdalene and include some of that tension between Peter and Mary from the Gospels of Thomas and Mary? I think that'd be kind of cool.
Well, I wouldn't ever rewrite the Bible. That's something that people did a long time ago that they need to stop doing. But what I might do, I've been thinking about a project where I can do a better job of showing people how much textual variation there is in the Gospel of John. First, I need to get my PhD. But once I write my dissertation, that's actually a project I'm thinking about doing down the line. So if you sign up on my email list, maybe if people put their email addresses in the chat, if you want to sign up on my email list, I can send you what's happening, the sorts of things I'm publishing.
Oh, that would be great. I love that suggestion, Lindsay. I know that Libbie is in a place right now when you're writing your PhD and you're trying to get a job in an academic institution, you have to kind of hold back some of the more radical suggestions just so that
that's true. Get a job before you say the thing that's going to make everybody mad.
That's right. So I don't know, maybe one day I'll write a short story and give her total credit using her research or something. Okay, other questions? Karen Medland. Karen, we see your hand.
Hi there. So I'm really just fascinated in some way by what you're saying, Libbie, because I spent my sabbatical leave kind of wandering around Europe looking at paintings of Mary Magdalene. And just seeing even the way she changed, like how they changed the color of her clothing, how they changed her position in the pictures as kind of time went on, and there was this neat, this desire of the patriarchy to kind of suppress her power. And just that whole piece, and I'm just really fascinated by, and I don't know if this is something, I'm hoping this would be something you'd be looking at, is, I've heard or I've read that, John's often considered kind of the Gnostic gospel, the gospel about the hiddenness. And whether this is part of what you're kind of leading us towards.
Oh, I agree completely. And even more to the hiddenness is the manuscript variants. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper into John. By the way, do I hear a beautiful Irish accent, Karen?
Glasgow.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I lived in Ireland for a year in my undergrad. I do think that John is a gospel. There's a little maxim about John that it's shallow enough for a child to play in, but deep enough for an elephant to swim in. What I think is fascinating is that John meets you where you're at. It's not a normal book. It's not a normal book. So if you go deeper, I found I was doing a lot of, as I mentioned, meditation. The deeper I went into myself, the more and more manuscript variants that I found. I found it fascinating. John is in some ways like a mirror. It kind of meets you wherever it is that you're at. And I do think that there are some sort of hidden, interesting truths in John, especially in the manuscript variants, which I think are so thrilling. And there's also a lot of Johannine theology in what I'm talking about, such as laying your life down for your friends. That's a really big thing in the Gospel of John. If Mary Magdalene was meant to have this central confession, but her friends couldn't handle it, maybe she laid her life down because her friends needed her gospel, or not her gospel, but this gospel.
Libbie, I hope that people have heard really clearly in your conversation tonight that this is not a scholar who's like trying to Dan Brown the Bible. Is that your this whole journey for you is a journey of the love of scripture, love of God, this pressing toward a deeper understanding of what it means to be Christian and who Mary Magdalene really was in the story. So I just want to underscore that for folks. I love that about you, and I love that about your work, and I love how much you love the church. I mean, so this is not a deconstructive work. This is actually a work to correct a false construction of the story, which I think is a different kind of scholarly task, and one that has a whole different sort of emotional side to it. So I just want to say how much I appreciate that.
I think that's why Diane and I resonate.
Yeah, I'm the loving critic. I can be critical and say the truth, but it's always out of love. And that's one of the things that I just adore about you. Cindy, I see that hand. Richard, can you unmute Cindy Caldwell? There you go.
I can unmute myself, I think.
Oh, good.
So Elizabeth, this is fascinating to me because I wrote my dissertation on Mary Magdalene. And my PhD is in mythological studies with an emphasis in depth psychology, so Carl Jung stuff. And one of the things that I really focused on was that Jesus represented the male archetype of the divine and Magdalene represented the female archetype of the divine, and it needed the two of them to get him resurrected. And she was the stimulus as the feminine, and the male is the foundation. And so their marriage was both spiritual, literal, well, literal, we can't prove anything, but so I'm fascinated with this whole idea of the anointing as well, because not only was the anointing changed with names and people, but where he was anointed. And I'm not sure which gospels now. One was for anointed his feet, the other anointed his head. And typical of that time to anoint someone's head was to anoint them and consecrate them as king or savior. So I'm just fascinated with this whole information. I need to rewrite my dissertation now. So
That doesn't sound fun.
no, it wouldn't be, and it won't happen.
Writing a
But in
dissertation
theory,
is hard. But you know what I will say is, Cindy, I was really confused, honestly, as to why I was the first person who was looking at these manuscript variants in John around Mary Magdalene. I was like, has nobody looked at this? And to me, it's the text critical guild is terribly white male, and they're very intelligent men of integrity. I love text critics. They're really good men, but you can't have an entire field look the same, especially the people who are controlling the text of the Bible. It's not safe for the rest of us, because they might, if they see the name Mary crossed out twice, they shrug. They didn't do anything about it. They just said that's the strangest change in the papyrus, and they moved on. So I am really trying to call it to everybody's attention and saying this has consequences for exegesis. This absolutely has consequences for Mary Magdalene studies and for Gospel of John studies. And so I'm really just trying to bring it to everyone's attention. So I'm glad to bring it to a scholar like you.
thank you. Well, and it's fascinating to think about the idea of so many of the female names were eliminated or changed to male names in the New Testament as
Junia
well.
and Junius, yeah.
Right. All of those. And just that women, we were throwaway. We were property, right? So yeah, I love that you're bringing us to the forefront, and we're getting to relive, we're getting to reconstruct Magdalene. She's a feminist and an activist today. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Benita, we have a minute left of Libbie's time. So if you have a quick question, and she can respond to you.
Hi, Benita.
Benita, you're going to have to unmute.
Quickly. I have been talking about you since I got to listen to you from General. And I want to say you're welcome when you thanked us all, because it was a fight. And I am so glad, because I am seeing people like you now just come on the scene and rejuvenate and do the studies. And I'm so excited about this. I've been sharing this with you, and I'm sorry this is a statement, but I've been sharing this last week and exciting some other women. So thank you for your work. And I got out my old 16th century conformed King James version. And it's just, you know, what I can do in English is just so much more because of you. So thank you.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you again to all the women before me whose shoulders I am standing on, who knew that something was wrong, who worked to change the church, so that I grew up in a church where I was never told that there was something that I could not do. I was never once told that. I'm the first generation of women in the Episcopal Church who grew up that way. And those are the sort, and maybe there's a reason you say to women, don't look, you're not smart, because then they might find out what you did. So I want to say thanks to all the women who worked so hard to change things so that I would have a safe place to do this kind of work. So Diane, I do need to hop on to unfortunately, a different Duke related thing. But
can you run that video real fast, and then I will wrap up on the other side. Libby is going to share with us her Magdalene song, and then she has to check out, but I will wrap us up for the evening. So,
and we'll send a link to the song in the follow-up recording too.
Yes, we will.
So I will just show the song, the Magdalene song that caused me, oh gosh, I think when I went to the Johannes, I changed. Let me go back to the Magdalene. Where is it? Wait, hold on. Sorry, Diana. There we go. Now I've got it. Oh, there it is. Okay, so let me, where is it? For some reason, it's not, let me try one more time. It's okay if I show up like 1 minute late to this other thing. Okay, so this is my Magdalene music video. There we go. So this is the song that started it all, and it was filmed in the garden where that prayer to the Virgin Mary took place. Here, I'm going to start it now. Is the music working? There it is.
I went to the garden of the Holy Virgin Mary, most pure, conceived without sin. I was down on my knees with the dirt on my skin, and I asked for the blessing of the Magdalene. There she came to me in a state of grace, bearing things to reveal in this earthly place, secret songs of the flesh like a holy hymn. Oh, I asked for the wisdom of the Magdalene. She's a bleeding heart full of blinding light, which she carefully conceals till the time is right. Oh, a woman heavy with the dark of night, she will do, hallelujah, what she came here to do. She is ready now to do what she came to do. There's a picture hanging by the bedroom door. It's a vision of Our Lady, maybe virgin, maybe whore. Either way, there are roses flowing from her hands, the soft, sure blessing of the Magdalene. Well, there once was a time by the ocean shore. I was praying in the sand, I was praying to my Lord, saying, what would you have from me? Anything at all. He said, be as much yourself as is possible. Girl, be as much yourself as possible. Garden of the Holy Virgin, ready now to see what I've been burying within. It was never sin at all, it's a deep amen, the long hidden knowledge of the Magdalene. Ah, Jesum per Mariam, ah, Jesum per Mariam, I asked for the blessing of the Magdalene. Ah, Jesum per Mariam, ah, Jesum per Mariam, we're looking for the blessing of the Magdalene. We're all aching for the blessing of the Magdalene.
Bravo. Thank
Thank
you
you so much, Diana.
Yeah, it's just every time, Libby, you just do it to me. So much hope, so much joy. And I hope you go forth this night and know you've blessed us all.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much to everyone for listening, and I hope to stay in touch. Thanks, Diana and Richard. See you soon.
Bye-bye. Well, I just appreciate all of you joining me tonight. It's been so exciting for me to introduce Libby to you. As Benita testified, the first time I heard Libby tell this whole story sitting in that Starbucks for all those hours, I literally started telling everyone I knew afterwards what had happened, and that I had met someone who told me a story about Mary Magdalene that I'd never heard before, and it helped me understand the whole of the Gospel of John differently. So I think that if that's what Mary Magdalene has been waiting to do for 2 millennia, we can be so fortunate that we are the people who are receiving this incredible, incredible gift. Libbie and I are thinking about doing some work together. She mentioned very briefly, we're considering putting together a pilgrimage to Mary Magdalene sites in the south of France, which will probably be in the summer of maybe next summer, but more likely 23. But you won't be able to miss that. I'll tell you about that on the cottage as we make plans. And we sure hope that a number of people here would be able to join us. And she has some, as you can imagine, Libbie is one of those type people who wanders through the world and miracles seem to happen in her wake. She has some amazing stories about especially a cave in the south of France. That's a Marian site where most tourists don't know about it. And we would be going there together. So any final questions for me that you want to ask before we all check off tonight? Anything going on? Something you want to comment on a little further? Say something to your friends here at the cottage?
Diane,
Yeah. Hi, Bet.
please do something with midnight mass.
Oh,
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I
oh,
want to know what's in the head of that guy who wrote it. I mean, I just
thank you so much. I, of course, mentioned that in my last issue of the cottage, and I had talked about it some on Twitter. As I know that some of you picked up the Netflix show because I encouraged you to watch it. If you missed all of that, there is a Netflix series right now called Midnight Mass. And it is ostensibly in the horror genre, but it's the
big time.
yeah, it is scary. But if you know horror as a genre, you'll know that there's actually usually a lot more gore and a lot more violence than there is in Midnight Mass. And one of the complaints about Midnight Mass from true horror aficionados is that I read this one review and it said, why do these people talk so much? And they're only talking about theology. That's really true. It's kind of theo horror, if that's a genre, because it is huge sections of sermons and conversations about the nature of evil and people wondering about whether heaven exists. And oh my gosh, it's 6 episodes.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, 6-7 episodes of the most extraordinary theological journey you'll probably see on television this decade.
Right.
So
well,
I'm
do
actually
something with it. I mean, please.
What I'd love to do is I'll put this out on the cottage, but you can all hear it here tonight. In about 2 weeks, I'll do our next cottage, and I want to have that conversation. I wanted to focus on Midnight Mass. So if any of you are interested in a piece of popular culture that for those of you who are still working clergy or do a lot of preaching or work with people in terms of their spiritual lives, it is one of the most watched programs on the streaming service Netflix right now. People are talking about it all over social media. There's a million sermon topics that can be drawn out of that show. And I really want to do something. And I'm thinking about inviting my friend, David Dark, who is a theology professor from Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, who loves writing about popular culture, to come on with me, and the two of us have a discussion and then open it wide up for everybody to join in. So keep your eyes open for that in about 2 weeks. Do watch Midnight Mass. Do not watch it at night. And if you do decide to watch it at night, close your windows, close your shades. You do not want to look out of a window at night after watching Midnight Mass. It will be too painful, I promise you. And so in the meantime, think on all of these beautiful things about the blessings that might be offered to us through a new reading of the Gospel of John, this amazing journey that we've had over time, where patriarchy might finally be giving way to a truer story of what was always intended in the word itself.
And
So-
Diane, you're a treasure. You're a
Oh, thank
treasure.
you. That's so sweet of you to say. I really
Well, you begin
appreciate
my
it.
morning.
Well, good night, everybody. Thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to see your faces every time we do this. Good night.